Hi everybody, I am Jeffrey Hauser, author of the Learn With series. Thanks for checking these screencasts out. Today we're going to talk about writing tests against asynchronous code within an Angular application using Karma and Jasmine. This episode will show you how to write code within a fake async zone. I have here the Learn With application. It's a task manager application which shows you how to build Angular if you read through my books step by step. And I'm going to tone in on a specific section of code here. So I'm going to log into the application, and where a promise comes in, if I create a new task, I'm using ng bootstrap library here, and when it creates this pop-up modal, it returns a promise so we can respond to the close. So creating a brand new task, and the same code is used for both creating a new task and editing a task. And I'm going to show you the code behind this. I have this method here. It's a private method inside this tasks component. What it does is it grabs the modal service, which is ngb modal. So it's a provider or a service that comes from this ng bootstrap library used strictly for opening modals. And we're opening one, and we're doing an instance of the task cu component, which is the pop-up for creating or updating a task. That's what the cu stands for there. We're passing in a title and a task instance, and then we listen to this result then. That's how we listen to promises. If you do a lot with Angular, you probably are aware it does a lot with observables, but doesn't usually use promises, but this library returns a promise. So when we close the modal, we pass the updated or brand new task object, and then we do some bunch of processing with it. Either if it was brand new, we basically add it to the task grid array and then refresh the grid. Otherwise, we replace the object inside the sort of task grid array with the new updated one. So these are the things that happen when we close the module. And if the pop-up is closed without, or canceled rather, we have this catch here, but in the code nothing happens with the catch. So I want to take a look at the test code. I went to split screen so we can see the code we're testing up top and the test code at the bottom. This often works better with a much bigger screen resolution, but we can deal with it for the purposes here. So a lot of this is set up by default by Angular, but we have an instance to the component inside the tasks component, and we have an instance of the fixture. We also added an instance of the ngb modal service. And after the test bed is compiled, I've already added in the relevant components needed. We're going to grab an instance of this test bed in the before each. Beyond that, we are going to, I created a describe block for open test window. And it's going to grab an instance of the ngb modal ref. This is a reference to the item that's popped up, the modal in the UI. We're going to call the modal service, which is a local value, and we're going to pass in the TCU component. Basically, within the test, we're replicating this first line of the open task method, and that gives us an instance of the ref that we can control in tests. So we can control when we close it. And then we're going to actually spy on the modal service open and return this modal ref instance that we control. So when the tests run in here, it's going to call this, and instead of calling that method and creating it, the spy is going to know to intercept it and return this own modal ref instance. From here, we're going to write our individual tests. Okay, let's write the test. I'm going to add a test here. Should open modal and pass new task when closed using FakeAsync. And I want to run this test in a FakeAsync zone, so I'm going to do this, and it looks like I have to import that. There we go. Add the import. So FakeAsync is a specific Angular thing. What we're going to do, we're going to spy on so do we need an any here? I do not. That should be all lowercase. So this is inside this task grid.refresh is called. We're just going to add a spy there so that it doesn't actually get called because that component is not actually being rendered. We're going to, I'm writing tests as if we're creating something new. So I won't be passing in a task. This is a private method. I'm going to use this sneaky syntax. Which lets us call private methods, because in JavaScript nothing's actually private. Obviously this would be very different if we were dealing with a different platform or different languages. Then we're going to a task should be passed here when we close it. So what I'm going to do is I went through this in my bonus book, the one that covers testing. Import that task VO equals. So I created a bunch of basically mock tasks. I'm going to use task 5 here. So I'm just creating an existing task object and using that. So not creating one, just using something. Then modal ref dot close task, and that should run this. But of course, it's a promise, so something needs to trigger that other than calling this. If we weren't running in the FakeAsync zone, it wouldn't happen at all. What we want to do is call tick, which we're telling part of the FakeAsync zone. We're telling this code that says, hey, move to the next iteration of the redraw cycle, and it's that tick that's going to cause this code inside the anonymous result handler to fire. And then here we would have a bunch of assertions. I'll expect component task grid refresh to have been called. We want tasks dot length to be 1, because we start with nothing and we're going to add one item to it. And we can do another tasks O to equal task. this should do it. I'm going to use the IntelliJ debugging. I already have a debugger inside here, and then we can see this run. IntelliJ is phenomenal at helping us debug single tests. And it opened this up off screen, but it opened up a Chrome window. Chug, chug, chug. And there we go. We're in the test. So add the spy, then we call it. Oh, and I stepped over, stepped in. But when I called it, it did the modal ref, it set the title, it set the task. Task being null in that case. It's doing close, which does nothing. But once I do the tick, it should pop in here into the result handler. And there it is. That's actually, oh, task is null. And yes, that's all correct. So task is the argument we passed in, which we didn't pass in an argument, so it's null to the initial method. So then we are going in here, task grid tasks, an empty array, and then calls refresh, and then it should go here. And boom. Oh. So I messed something up. Oh, that should not be a method call. So let's rerun that again, and it should succeed. Based on the underline, it looks like that's the only one that failed. I'll step in this time. Gets sort of opens, and we're spying on this open method on the modal service. So this gives us the model ref that we defined in the before each. Step through, set up the result handlers from the promise. The tick forces it to go. Adding a new one, refresh, refresh. And so we need to add one more thing here. It's probably going to ask me to import that. Yeah, for some reason I didn't really deep into this when I was writing the book code, but there's timers still in the queue somehow. So some code under the hood is starting timers. This just discards them. And I'll run this one more time, and this should succeed. Now let's talk a little about FakeAsync. I actually, of the 4 options I'm going to cover in this series, this is the one I like the least. Because I prefer to test it with some form of real async and have the code run that way. I don't like I like to avoid the fake async zone unless I explicitly have a timer or like a set interval or something within the code, and then this tick lets us control when that runs. So of the 4 versions I'm going to show you, this is my least favorite. And there we go. All green, perfect success. So I spoke about fake async, and I spoke about, I showed you how to write the test. The tick is the progress, in essence, a browser redraw cycle, and that needs to occur before the promises or observables are resolved. And so this is how we can do fake async to test the result handler of a promise. We could use the same thing to test the error handler, except instead of close, it would be dismiss, is what we would call. But it's beyond the scope of what I was trying to demonstrate here. That completes my demonstration on how to test promises or asynchronous code using a fake async zone within Angular, Karma, and Jasmine. In the next session, I'm going to take a look at using the done method, which is not an Angular specific thing, but we'll talk more about that in the next session, and I hope you stick around for it.